Are you looking for new headers for your small or big block? Are you concerned whether you should spend the extra money on ceramic coating? What about performance? These are all good questions. The point of this video is to look at two basic headers that you could get from Summit Racing and have at your doorstep in the next couple of days. One is an unpainted version from a reputable brand, Hooker Headers. Another is a more generic model, which is ceramic coated from Summit Racing. We're going to look at the difference in performance, the difference in sound, the difference in underhood temperature, and finally the difference in cost of these two options. So I've posted some pictures of the before and after install of what I had previously on the truck was the Hooker Headers unpainted and also the new ones from Summit Racing. So I'll let you guys be the judge, but to me it's pretty obvious as to which one is more aesthetically pleasing. But now let's get into some of the more nitty-gritty details. Now, the only thing that I won't be able to show you in this video, and that's just because I don't have my own personal dyno, but I do plan to get the truck on a dyno here in the next couple of weeks, will be the performance differences. Now, something to point out, when I do provide that video, please keep in mind this isn't the only change that was made. So to be fair, it's going to be somewhat difficult to ascertain exactly how much the headers played a part in any performance differences, or if that has to do with different tire height, rear end gears, drive shaft, things like that, other things that have changed. The things you need to know for this video is the Hooker headers are a 1 5/8 inch primary, whereas the Summit Racing are a 1 3/4. I'll let you guys make your own judgment as to whether the 1 3/4 is large enough for my application, but the main takeaway that I've gotten after watching many of the videos is that if you're on the cusp of two different primary sizes, it's usually best to choose the one that's slightly smaller. A lot of times you'll see companies will advertise peak horsepower numbers with a larger primary tube diameter, but that can also be at the expense of power under the curve where you spend most of your time. So if you're like me and you're not racing this thing, you know, all the time, you're just going out and having fun. If you're on the cusp and you do the math and watch other videos, choose the one that is slightly smaller. That's what I did. Let's get into the rest of this video. Up first, let's look at sound.
Okay, so the point here is not to make some crazy exhaust video. I've already got that. If you want to hear what it sounds like, 2.5 inch versus 3 inch, you can hear that in my other video. But this is more just, I'll put the two videos back to back, do a quick little rev and see what it sounds like.
Okay, so as you can see, the sound difference is pretty minimal to my naked ear. I really couldn't tell much of a difference. It's possible if I was going to something that was totally different, maybe it was a 1 5/8 to a 2 inch or a shorty to a long tube, you would hear it. But because these are both long tube headers, I didn't expect a ton of difference in sound. Now, for comparison purposes, I've also using the decibel meter here, the app on my phone, so you'll get to see if there's any difference. Now remember, decimal is dBs on a log scale, so any small difference in the meter is actually a larger perceived difference to your ear. So we can take a look at that and we can see which one is quieter, louder, or if they are the same. So the next big thing here is underhood temperature.
Temps 192. Let's take some measurements here. Driver's side. Headers at 400-ish, 430. They're all around 430 on the driver's side. Again, I just shut it off. Passenger side's a little bit cooler. No, still around 430, 440. Anywhere between 375, we'll call it, 440. Let's look at the intake. Intake, 130-ish, 125. Just for reference, ambient temperature outside right now, it's still about the same, 67. Just measure the floor real quick, just out of curiosity.
We'll do it right here on that metal spot. 125 on the floor.
Comparison. Now, just so you know, today is a much hotter day than before. It's almost 100 degrees outside. 5 minutes, let's come back and look at the temperature. So, number 1, 130 degrees. Number 3, 138. 144, okay, go to the other side. You can see massive difference. It was over 400 degrees, 134, 147, 143, 134, okay? Way cooler with the ceramic coated headers. Let's look at the intake, 140. So I think that's probably more a function potentially of water temp. I'll have to go back and look at what it was before. Let's look at the inside temp and see if we see any massive change in the floor. Again, it's a much warmer day, 119 degrees. So big story here, obviously, ceramic coated headers. The primaries are much cooler. That's gonna translate overall to a cooler engine bay. I'd love to do this on a day where the temperatures were the same, but unfortunately it didn't work out like that. We're having a heat wave in Utah right now, so it is gonna be a little bit warmer, but nevertheless, you can see quite the difference.
To me right there, just that difference in underhood temperature, I think is enough to sell it alone. But obviously you may still be on the fence, so we can talk about cost. So the cost of the Summit Racing header is actually less expensive than that of the Hooker header. And to me, looking at the two, I don't think that has anything to do with, you know, the quality of the product. In fact, the header flanges on the Summit Racing header, in my opinion, are a much better design than what's on the Hooker header. And there are 2 reasons for that. Number 1, the face of the flange that mates to your cylinder head on the Summit Racing header is completely flat, meaning when you bolt that up, there's no high-low spots where, you know, they slid the primaries through and then seal welded them and you've got like a small gasket sealing surface that you're dealing with. You've got a nice flat surface and you're gonna get a good gasket seal. So in terms of a leak-free seal, +1 to the Summit Racing headers. The other thing, if you've ever installed a set of headers and the bolts don't line up perfectly and you're trying to draw everything down, you may have noticed sometimes that the outer bolts on your header will bend inwards a little bit, or I should say the flange will bend inwards when you tighten it up. Now I always like to tighten these things in a couple stages, even though it's a low torque, you know, just draw them up evenly. Don't just do one side at a time because it's easy to bend that flange, and once you bend it, you're worried about sealing. The flanges on the Summit Racing header are substantially thicker than that of the Hooker headers. That's +2. The only things I will say, and this applies to both headers, is if you have ARP head studs, it's going to change the height of your head bolts, so you may need to clearance the bottom of the flanges. I had to do that both with the Summit Racing and the Hooker headers. The other thing that I needed to do with the Hooker headers, and this is just weird, but I actually had to enlarge the holes for the individual exhaust manifold, header bolts, whatever you want to call them, because they weren't lining up. So I didn't have to do that with the Summit Racing. So to me, after looking at all this, it's a no-brainer. But you know, you can make your own decision. Obviously, if you're looking to have that name that everyone knows, you could go with Hooker. And obviously Hooker, this is probably their lowest cost option. So you could get one of their ceramic coated headers or a super competition, and it may step up in quality. So just something to consider. The very last thing I will say is fitment wise. Now I was trying to pick a header, and this is the reason I chose a Summit Racing header. I was trying to pick a header that would fit up to my existing exhaust without making any modifications. It's very difficult because while all of these should fit a big block Chevy, it's hard to say whether the height and spacing of the collectors would be the same. And what I can say is it's close if you're thinking of converting, if you have these Hooker headers and you're looking at something different, you're considering these Summit Racing ones. If you don't have a crossover pipe, if you have minimal obstructions, maybe your exhaust doesn't go up over the axle, it just dumps, or you know, something like that, this will probably work. I had a crossover pipe and it spaced them out ever so slightly where I needed to cut that crossover pipe and lengthen it and re-weld it. So they are different, but they are close. Otherwise, in terms of fitment, to me, it looks like the Summit Racing are not an equal length header, whereas the hooker headers do appear to be equal length. And what that means is each primary tube is the same overall length. The problem with that is you get one of your tubes, so obviously the longest tube is going to be the one closest to the bumper. The shortest, generally, if they were unequal length, would be the one furthest towards the firewall. So to make them all equal length, the ones that are further towards the firewall, you've got to add some bends into. And what that does is, on a truck application like mine, or maybe any other big block, that tube on the passenger side gets very, very close to even a stock oil pan. So you're talking less than 1/4 of an inch. So you figure you may have that, you know, as we saw in the temperatures before, the primary temperature on that header after it was shut down was around, you know, 400 degrees, 375 degrees. So it might be a little bit cooler towards the collector, but still you're heating up that oil. Whereas with the Summit Racing brand headers, they're well far away. So that's something else to consider. Not only are you improving kind of your overall, you know, heat soak under the engine bay with the hood closed, but also underneath the car. So I hope this video was helpful. To me, if I could go do it all over again, I don't think I will ever go back to a non-coated header. It just seems to me like, especially living in a climate where you get really hot in the summertime, it's in your best interest to keep your engine bay cooler. And the other thing that this sold for me was that Summit Racing has really high quality stuff. I mean, I would have expected the hooker one to be far superior in quality, and that's why you paid a little extra price. But as far as I can tell, from a quality standpoint, the Summit Racing header is pretty much better in every way. So I hope you liked the video. I hope this was interesting. Hopefully you learned something. Go out, get that hot rod started up, go drive it, have some fun. See you next time, guys.